Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you so much for coming to the Traverse Area Historical Society monthly program, kicking off the fall and very appropriately on a topic of education. It's my pleasure to introduce Educator Karen Reiser, who will present on the history of education on the Old Mission Peninsula. In her presentation, she will follow the path of educational presentation from Anishinabek to the present-day European style of education. And as a special treat, if you are interested in more information about this topic, Karen has authored a book recently, and there are copies of the book for sale on the table on the back. So please take advantage of that. Just as a reminder, for those of you who are members of the society, and I'm thinking most of you are here, that our next month, October the 15th, is our annual meeting, where we will have presentations from the award winners of the Michigan History Days. And I can't tell you how exciting it is to have young historians present on their own projects. So that will be the program, and then it will follow with State of the Society meeting, board elections, and a bylaw change that we are making to make it easier for us to give grants to students. So that's coming up on October the 15th. And so please welcome Karen Reiser.
Thank you. Freeze. Good morning. I'm Mrs. Reiser, and I will be your guest teacher today. And we are going to have a good day. To begin our day, I would like you to look at the screen for your morning message that is projected on it. First, coats, boots, go in your lockers, and your gym shoes should be on. We're going to have gym class in about an hour. Did I say thaw? Freeze. You're still frozen. Next, grab a wipe and clean your desk and chair completely. Then sanitize your hands. Once you have done this, make your lunch choice. Make sure you have 2 sharpened pencils and use the restroom one at a time. Sign out and use the class passes, the bottles of hand sanitizer at the back of the room. 1 labeled boy and 1 labeled girl. When that is all done, put your free reading book on the corner of your desk and get your morning work from the basket. Begin working, and when done, read. I'll take attendance as you work. If you forget any of these directions, just use that list on that I projected on the board to refer to. You have 15 minutes. I will put the timer underneath the camera. Thaw. That is not the classroom your grandmother went to. How did we get here? This is one of the things I was very curious in my retirement. We have time to think. And I was wondering, how did we get to where we are? But before I could do that, as an educator, I am very interested in the past, the present, and the future of the educational process. I find the process and its results to be of paramount importance to our lives. When thinking of education, I feel it's necessary to look at the past, evaluate the present, and to the best of our ability, predict what will be needed for the future. This is not and was not an easy task. Before I could research education's path, I had to answer several questions. 1, what is education? Another, what is the relationship between the educator and education? Next, who should be educated? And finally, what are the social factors that influence education? Once I realized the answers to these questions, I could then start my research. Okay, what is education? I began looking up synonyms for the word education, and I found quite an array. Some positive, some not so positive. I found words such as enlightenment, scholarship, culture, brainwashing, and training. There were others I chose not to include because they were terribly harsh. It was clear that the concept of education is multidisciplinary, multidimensional, which may explain why the discussions on this topic get so heated. The definition I came up with after some research and a lot of experience is, I feel education is the formal and informal presentation of knowledge leading to the ability to reason and judge so as to enable the learner to survive and prosper as an adult. So what do we mean by survive or prosper? I decided not to go in that direction. I think we could discuss these concepts forever, but survival and prosperity are each defined individually. So we see all those little brain neurons ready to suck up all this information. For me, the B is a perfect symbol of the educator-education relationship. The bee's purpose is to sustain life, pollinating the flora and fauna on which our and its very life depends. Thinking back to our definition, we connect with the idea of survival and prosperity. For the bee, each plant presents a unique blossom. Oops, getting to our blossoms too soon. A unique blossom that requires the bee to adjust its approach to attain its goal. This is also the way of the educator. As with the educational system, the bee is challenged by numerous outside factors. For the bee, it may be insecticides, loss of habitat, viruses, or unforeseen events. Education also faces many social challenges. It was really eerie for me to think that the idea of unforeseen events occurred to me pre-COVID, because that was certainly a major unforeseen event that had and still is having an effect on education. So who gets educated? Similar to the flowers blossom, every learner is unique. Each requires an individual approach depending on the characteristics it achieves, either through nature, nurture, or maturity. Here we have adult learners. We also have two individuals who visibly appear to have unique needs. It is also important to remember there are invisible variations within children as well. For me, I wish ADHD and dyslexia had been known as I was going through school, because my educational journey would have been far less trying. Education, what influences the way we educate our children? First, requirements for survival. Today, it is not necessary for my survival to know how to ride a horse. And in the 1600s, it was certainly not necessary for my great-great-grandfather to know how to drive a car. So what are the requirements for us to survive today? Lifestyle demands. What I need to know today is very different than what my grandmother needed to know. I often think of my grandmother. Oh, would she have ever loved a microwave or a submersion blender or a big double wide refrigerator? What would she think carrying your phone in your pocket? Knowing my grandmother, she would have loved it all. Then we have cultural shifts. I am now required to attend school as a child. My parents can no longer put me in a factory and make me work. And then the biggie, technology. And as I did my research, I learned a lot about this. Many products have entered the world of education over the years, such as lined paper. Oh my gracious. such as lined paper, the ditto machine, the photocopier, and presently the computer. Why, you have everything you need in that little Chromebook in your backpack. There was a time, I loved it, when a principal was very concerned in the one-room schoolhouse. What do you mean you're bringing paper into the classroom? You give those children paper and they will never remember how to clean their slates. Now, in kindergarten, the time of play, we have standardized testing. Times have definitely changed. Then, oh, I forgot to talk about politics, which is often better kept out of a conversation about education. And that's where we get into the kindergarten and this standardized testing. Even Dr. Seuss was a little upset about standardized testing. He never finished his book, Diff and Doofer Day. Dr. Seuss, one of a kind, that spoke to that subject of standardized testing. Now that we've established our mindset, we can look at our information. Location, location, location. In some ways, I am glad I geographically confined my research, but once I had completed it, I was pretty sure that what happened on Old Mission Peninsula had happened throughout the Midwest as our populations began to converge into the center part of our country. So what I'm going to talk about now is pretty typical of what happened in many locations. So to begin our journey, we can picture this peninsula before people. Imagine a fertile landform covered with luscious flora and fauna and silence. Soothing microclimate, spring, summer, and fall, a delight. Winters were most likely harsh. An interesting note is that the first inhabitants chose to move south and inland during the winter, being our original snowbirds. So the history of education on Old Mission Peninsula is going to be an overview of a variety of societies, the people who lived here and made it their home. Our journey will begin with the Native American peoples, the Anishinabek. It'll move on to the Madeline, a maritime school. Next, we will visit Peter Doherty's missionary era, and then move into the one-room schoolhouses and the consolidated schools. We'll conclude with a political journey and the charter school that today is a fledgling endeavor nourished by the unique setting of the Old Mission Peninsula. So let's get into the meat of this here. Anishinabek education. I was really fortunate to be able to go to Bashabash Town, where I was able to meet with two members of the reservation's educational community. These members are Canadian. They are relatives of the group of Anishinabek people or Anishinaabe people that did not want to be moved west, did not want to go to Omina, and went to Canada. And as Mr. Toulouse said, they went so deep into the woods of Canada, nobody cared about it. So what ended up happening is that their culture has stayed honest to what it was. Their language is pure. Well, can't say the same for those who stayed in this area of the country. So these people have come down here to teach the language to the descendants of the Native Americans who remained. There were the Odawa and the Ojibwe. Education was delivered through the tribe's daily activities. As they lived their lives, they conveyed knowledge, values, skills, and attitudes. Learning was based on respect for nature and for human responsibility to learn and live alongside it. There were stages of learning built into life, as learning was looked at as a lifelong experience. Educators were grandparents, elders, and tribal community. Both males and females were required to be educated. Each developing different skills required for the survival, there's that word again, of the tribe. The Native American language now, the Anishinabek, has just begun to take a written form. So there were no formal books for children to learn from. There was no writing, so it was all experience-based. The grandmothers raised children from the beginning or the first of their life through age 6. And when I say grandmother, this was a little difficult for me to understand. That really means any woman, older woman in the tribal community, not just your mother's and father's parent. So it was a shared obligation. And so you might be being taught by your aunts or cousins. Once you reached the age of 6, you moved on to gender-specific groups. The males went with the male members of the community, grandfathers, fathers, aunts, uncles, and the females with aunts, mothers, etc. And they worked alongside one another, and they were taught specific things. And by the age of 14, you were considered an adult and went on a vision quest to see what your purpose was in the tribe. Within the book, there are a lot of lessons that were learned by both males and females, and interesting ways in which they were conveyed. When I called to ask if there was somebody I could speak to, they were confused at first because they thought I wanted to know about present day education for Native Americans. I said, no, the original education that was given by the tribe. And she began to tell me about the grandmothers taking care of the children. And I said, oh. And she goes, oh, well, yes, moms and dads were outside making life happen while grandma was raising the babies. So then they would join the adults to learn as life was happening. And I kind of liked that idea. All aboard. This I love. There were 5 men who worked on a schooner, the Madeline, in the Great Lakes, and they were all illiterate. And they knew unless they became literate, they were not going to succeed in life. So one winter, they moored their boat in Bowers Harbor, hired a teacher who was being Traverse City historical teacher. People you probably know about, S.E. Waite. He was a very famous pioneer who did a lot of things for this community. But he was only 20 now, and they spent every morning all winter long in class. And then in the afternoons, they took care of chores and things that they needed to do to stay alive. And by the end of, or by the beginning of spring and of winter, they could read, write, and do some simple arithmetic, and went on to have very successful lives. The grandson of one of these sailors was an insurance tycoon, Edmund Fitzgerald, for which the freighter was named. So that education went a long way. Now we come to the Doherty era, 1840 to 1852. And the Doherty era took place during the time of Western expansion. And the renewed evangelical movement in our country. It was referred to as the Second Awakening. The First Awakening had occurred in Europe, where it was very strongly felt that it was every Christian's duty to promote, educate the faith, and mission, they had great missions. Second awakening occurred in Europe as well later on and moved across the Atlantic to America. And Peter Doherty was part of the second awakening. So politics and a cultural shift had the greatest effect on education at this time. So Peter Doherty was sent to the peninsula by the Presbyterian, what is it? My husband's going to talk about Peter Doherty in a few months, by the Presbyterian Board of Foreign Missions. And we have foreign in there because we were not a state yet. So we were considered foreign. And he came out, he introduced a very formal Eurocentric system of education. Students were taught to read, write, and speak English. Arithmetic, European culture, and religion were also taught. At first, the students were taught in a borrowed wigwam until the school, first built on the shore of the Elk River across the bay, was dismantled and reconstructed near the beach in the area of the Doherty House. At first, the student population was predominantly Native American, both adults and children, and slowly changed in time to include children of the white settlers. And the house you see on the screen is all restored and open for a tour out on the peninsula, having first served Doherty for 10 years. Now, to me, this is the very romantic Little House on the Prairie time, where school was where the students were. In Western Europe, the area where most people immigrated to the Midwest, formal education was a luxury for only the rich. The common working man needed his children working alongside him to survive. Desiring to be independent from the European class system, most pioneers craved an education for their children. They found a way to provide a school and a means of instruction. On Old Mission Peninsula, school has been known to take place in a barn, a home, and a deserted log cabin. Someone who could read, write, or do simple arithmetic would teach the children. Now, that deserted log cabin, before the children used it as school, was the bachelor quarters for a bull. So when I say they found a place, regardless, I don't know how that was that they decided to go to school there. Around 1852, Doherty's mission moved to Omina on the other side of the bay. Moving the mission across the bay did not diminish the need for education, and schools were built one by one. Old Mission School was the first one-room schoolhouse to be built in 1857. As the population on the peninsula grew, schools were added. In 1904, there were 7 one-room schoolhouses serving 7 individual districts. Each district defined the community and culture of that area. A map showing the 7 districts now hangs over the fireplace in the Peninsula Community Library. The term one-room schoolhouse annoyed many of the people I interviewed because very few schoolhouses were one room. There was usually a big room and a little room. The little room is where the preschoolers were, kindergartners, preschoolers, young guys. And then the big room is where you started kindergarten and went through whatever grade may be. For the most part, it was 8th grade on the peninsula. So the one-room schoolhouse pretty much describes the method of delivering education, all in one room with one teacher. So today, all but 2 of these schools remain on the peninsula. One is used as a winery, and the other 5 are personal residences. So the schools were built in this order in 1853, Old Mission School. Stony Beach School was built in 1859. 1862, the McKinley School. 1864, Bowers Harbor School. 1865, Mapleton School. Around 1883, the Archie School. That school holds the most mystery. 1884, the Ogdensburg School, and 1904, Maple Grove School. And you can see many of them closed. Well, if it didn't burn down, many of them closed in 1955, and there's a reason for that we will discuss a little later. Here's the Old Mission School. If you go visit the Doherty House or the old log church, you will find this building right next to the old log church. It was built in 1857, and there's one of the stories, there are a lot of stories in the book, but one of the stories that still brings a smile and sparks to me is the story of two farm boys who absolutely love dynamite. People who tell me this story are still laughing. And these boys love dynamite so much that, yes, one day when the school was vacant, they snuck up and blew the doors of the school right off their hinges. To this day, they still whisper the names of the culprits. So, Stony Beach School is located on Montague, and you can notice that the bell is still in the belfry, which is really lucky. The Old Mission School, they're still on a quest to locate that original bell. The McKinley School is located on the corner of Center Road and McKinley Road. This school was not named for President McKinley, as some people think. McKinley hadn't been president during the time of its construction. It is most likely named for the road on which it stands, that was in turn named for a local family. And when I first stumbled into this, I did read it was named for President McKinley. And when that was brought to my attention, I thought, oh dear, I've got myself into some peninsula feud. I think I better get this corrected. So there you go. Now, Bowers Harbor School is located on Neotawanta and Cropa Roads and also still has its bell. The Peninsula historian, Tim Carroll, reported that at one time there was a school in the Neotawanta area, which is Bowers Harbor. And when Neotawanta became a resort, only 2 students from the Cropa family remained in the school for the winter. Everybody else went to Chicago or wherever else they came from. So they closed the school, and the Cropa girls went to another nearby school. But that meant, I mean, supposedly you're only supposed to have to walk a mile to school, but they were walking a little more than a mile. The Mapleton School. This school was located on the corner of Devil's Dive and Seven Hills Road. It burned down in 1973 when it was a residence due to an electrical fire. And they rebuilt the home. It's built right on the same foundation. And in their front yard, the flagpole still stands strong. Now, the Archie School. Most of my information about the Archie School came from a parent-published recipe book by the women of the Archie School District. And in the foreword is the only place, even the librarian went on this massive hunt for me, was the only place where the school was mentioned. So the Archie School is located in the vicinity of Archie Park on Center Road, and it was built on land donated by A.P. Gray, who also has a road named for him, in 1883. Sadly, this log school burned down in 1893. There are no known surviving pictures. There's got to be one somewhere. I haven't found it, but I know there's got to be one. I looked in the recipe book, but there wasn't one. Ogdensburg School, 1884. This is now a residence, and the school has been completely remodeled. Maple Grove School is now a winery, and I had the privilege to teach some of the Cropa children whose families own this winery. And they're going into the school, both upstairs and downstairs, there are still many of the old architectural features in this school. My favorite are the floors. They're just like the floors that were in the school I went to that was 1,000,000 years old. And the stone blackboard is there. Another feature is that it's haunted. So objects left out, being a wine tasting room, objects left out in one place at closing are often found in some nonsensical place when the winery reopens in the morning. The volume on the sound system will go up all of a sudden to a tremendous and be tremendously loud, and no one is near the equipment. So one of the Cropas decided to bring in a medium. And the medium said there were children there playing and happy. And there was one adult teacher who was a mischievous one, who liked to move things around and evidently had had a bad time with a former female teacher and was still angry about that. So believe it or not, your choice. Here's a picture from the Bowers Harbor School, 1910. And in the back row, let me see if I can get my directions right. The fourth female student from the right is Sarah Cropa. Actually, it's Clara Cropa. Sarah Cropa is my friend. I'll have to correct that. Is Clara Cropa. And she is, so 1, 2, 3, 4, right there. Oh, you can't see my finger. And she was the young lady who had to leave the Neotawanta school and come to the Bowers Harbor School to be educated. Now, for those of you who are educators, wow, this blew my mind. So forgive me, George Swaney, for making your 1884 fourth grade report card public. It appears you did a good job. Interesting things to note. I am not sure how the grading system is weighted. It was not until the 1930s that the letter grading system became widely used. The letter E was omitted from the system for fear that one might think it meant excellent rather than failure. Hence, F was used. It's also interesting to read this it's also interesting that subjects such as arithmetic or reading are not mentioned. What does it mean, recited? I know, and if you read some of the experiences of the people I interviewed from the one-room schoolhouses, everything was recited. I would have been dead. And what's rhetorical? Head of the class, average scholarship, examination average, all things that I am completely unfamiliar with. Then I found 3 gentlemen who had gone to the one-room schoolhouses and interviewed all 3. And I happened to know them, and they were the same sort of student as they are adult today. And all 3 of them had a really different story to tell. The first is Jerry, and we know him as a good-natured fellow with a hearty laugh. And you can even tell from his picture, he's just this jolly guy. And his laugh got him in so much trouble in school and on the school bus. So read about Jerry's unique experience and how having his mother as a teacher was pretty miserable. This is Tim Carroll. And how did Mrs. Cornell, the county nurse, lesson on bad habits prepare him for his job as a protocol officer in the diplomatic corps? He describes the lesson as she She said she smelled of astringent. She had big white shoes on, a big hair. And she came in and she wrote habits across the board. And she talked about bad habits. And she erased the H. And she said, see, even if you do a little, you still have a bit. Then she erased the A. She says, bits are still left. Bad habits are very hard to get rid of. And then she erased the A. There's a bit. The B, there's a bit. The B, when she erased the B, you still have it. Bad habits were terrible things to have. He didn't go into detail as to what bad habits were, but it must have impressed him because now he's in his late 80s, early 90s, and he remembers that lesson vividly. This is Cal, and Cal is a very successful farmer on the peninsula. And how did orange slice candies relate to the loss of Cal's fingertips? He says, this is how I got this. And he raises his hand to me. I think lending your sled to a friend on Seven Hills Road might have been a mistake, Cal. He was more interested that day in helping the boy's father chop wood, he and his buddies. And when his sled was returned, it came down on his fingers. And he walked, well, the fathers put him in the truck to take him back to the school, but the truck wouldn't start. So they had to get somehow somebody else's vehicle, took him to the school where his teacher put a pencil here and wrapped rubber bands around it and took him to the hospital where he stayed for a week. And the orange slices do come in there. Now we're getting into my era, consolidation. And it was in the 1950s that this idea became very popular across the United States and the Old Mission Peninsula. So in 1955, the year you see that the schools closed, the township residents authorized a bond to fund a new school. This was a really difficult move because each one of those one-room schoolhouse communities defined their community by their school. So the thought of bringing all these into one school was really difficult for a lot of people. So during the year that it took to build the school, the children of the community were divided by grade and sent to one of the schools. This way they could get to know each other before they had to go to their new school. 305 students were enrolled when the school opened in 1956. The Old Peninsula School was now K through 8. I was so impressed that this community was so child-focused that they allowed the children to spend a full year together in the old schools prior to going to the new. And this is also how all the books from the old schools came together and the present-day Peninsula Community Library began. And that's a whole nother story. During the 2005-2006 school year, the Old Mission School was renovated. Big changes. The library was expanded. They had a heated floor. You could fall asleep in there listening to stories. And their collection got bigger. And this was also the precursor to the new Peninsula Community Library. Then the state of Michigan upsets the balance as the world, or our world, was in shock when in October 4th, 1957, the Russians launched Sputnik. Our nation was in shock. We were totally demoralized. And I can still remember this. And in 1958, the National Defense Education Act was passed, enhancing the teaching of math and science. In 1964, Public Act 289 required all school districts to provide a K through 12 education. Old Mission was in trouble. They could only provide a K through 8 education. Therefore, they had to join a new school district TCAPS, Traverse City Area Public Schools. And this was really hard for the students leaving the peninsula as 8th graders and going into Traverse City, where they didn't know anyone. They had to leave on the bus immediately after school, so there was no extracurricular activities where you might possibly get to know someone. And they didn't feel very well accepted in the TCAP system. Now, my memories at this time with this whole Sputnik thing was the era of the air raid drill. And we would, like wind drills today, we would go out into the hall for these drills, sit with our knees to our chests, our head down, and arms over our heads. Oh dear, I must place my feet just right because those boys across the hall might see my underpants. Big concern. And it was for me. Then an unexpected 180. October 15th, 2015, TCAPS announced it was closing 3 of the smaller outlying schools, Old Mission Elementary School being one of them. Over the next 2 years, the people of Old Mission community worked fervently and ultimately purchased the school building and set up a new charter school. And this was daily work by hundreds of people. This was no simple task, but again, the community worked together to maintain maintain the quality of education on the peninsula. So here are 3 of my little guys that I used to sub for all the time. And the new Old Mission Peninsula School opened September 4th, 2018 on a very rainy day. The first year was completed in 2019 and considered a success. Looking to the future, Old Mission Peninsula School hopes to soon serve grades K through 8. They have come full circle. Well, sadly, they did go up to grade 6, but found the population that was willing to stay in such a small school for their junior high school years was extremely limited. So now we're serving preschool through 5th grade. And that made sense to me. All their peers were going to the Traverse City middle schools, joining varsity teams, junior varsity teams, the orchestra, the bands, things that this small school could not provide for 6 students. So it takes a community. The Native American community educated its children. The one-room schoolhouses defined community. Consolidation redefined community, and the community saved its school. What will the future be for the educational community on Old Mission Peninsula? Only time will tell. And the Peninsula School is now beginning, I believe, its 5th year this year. So I do have books available that tell a whole lot more of the story for $12, cash, check, or credit card. But you can also find these books at Horizon Bookstore. And that is it. Oh, you do? Well, that's great. And the library. I don't know if you have any questions. Oh.
Yes, I just wanted to make a comment. When I did some research, I discovered
No, and some of the Peninsula students did that as well in the wintertime when there was so much snow you couldn't move back and forth between the two areas. And I heard stories of staying in hotels and things like that. Um, but I was not clear enough about that to write about it. But yes, it must have been interesting. I found school buses came about in the 1950s. Uh, it was very interesting to watch as needs were satisfied and things changed. I was also given a book, How Schools Changed, 1885 to 2019, Traverse City Public Schools, written by Richard Fiddler, who is sitting in the back of the room here, that I'm going to read eagerly.